Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Greg Lamberson. Greg, how you doing today?
Doing very well, Mr. Sledge. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's such an honor. But Greg, before we talk about why you are here, I want the people that don't know you to get a chance to know you a little bit, because I think I'm really happy to have you here for not just Guns of Eden, but a lot of the things you've done. You've been the producer, director of 9 feature films, most of which you have wrote as well. Real quick, I just want to ask, because you're also an author. You published about 15 books as well. Writing a screenplay versus writing a book, how is that different for you?
It's a lot easier. There's a lot more white space on the page. There's a lot fewer words. You don't have to go through an editorial process where an editor corrects your word structure or your intent. No, it's much easier, and I'm very fast when it comes to writing scripts and very intuitive, because I know if the pace that I'm creating feels like I'm watching a movie. Whereas if you're writing a book, you spend so much time getting into the characters' heads and stuff, you don't feel that pacing while you're writing. When I write a script, I've learned to do very little outlining, and that way I'm anxious to see what happens next. I have a general idea, but I find that if I'm surprising myself, then hopefully I'll surprise the audience. But I write faster and better if I don't know what's every little detail that's going to happen.
Sure. Well, I mean, and also you talk about how, you are a writer, you are a director, a producer. Is it easier for you to direct something that you've written, or are there times where you would rather direct stuff that other people have written to make their, images come to life in your head?
What I found was that as a writer, director, producer, I was trying to make things easier on myself, and maybe editing the script down in certain ways, or being less ambitious with the approach to what was on the page. So I kind of had to teach myself not to do that. And the reason that I did a film called Killer Rack, which a friend of mine wrote, it's the one film I've directed that somebody else wrote, was really just to see what that process was like and to see what I could bring to somebody else's story. And it has helped me with the other films I've done since then, I think, because it has taught me how to separate writing and directing, and how to put on my director's hat and see what I can do to elevate the script, instead of putting on my producer's hat and just worrying about how we get through the day. It's tough doing all three. It really is. I have to do all three because they're such low budget films. I can't pay anyone else.
And what I love about that is you're talking about how, you really cut your teeth in the horror genre, but your newest film, Guns of Eden, is an action movie. You wrote the screenplay for that. You directed that. And that link is down in the description as well, guys. So you can make sure that you're checking that out. But you've once been called by Fangoria magazine the busiest man in horror. Now, that is quite the compliment. And you got to figure, like you said, directing movies like Rack or Killer Rack, Widow's Point, Johnny Gruesome, Slime City. How do you, and obviously you're a family man as well, how do you manage all that time between, writing books, writing movies, producing movies, directing movies, being a family man? How is it hard for you to juggle those things, or do you have a pretty understanding family that's right there behind you?
It was a lot harder before the pandemic. The pandemic kind of forced us to slow down and, just do what we could, which was a large part of why I chose this particular film. But my wife co-produces with me. I usually initiate the project if I haven't already written it. Like in the case of Widow's Point, I optioned the book. But my wife does the business stuff, the stuff that's not fun, the paperwork on Guns of Eden, finding out who's vaccinated, who has had their tests done, and all that stuff. And my daughter, she acted in Widow's Point. She had a very large role, so she was good in that. So we try and keep her involved somewhat, but it's not really her thing.
Right. Well, and what made you want to do Guns of Eden? Like I said, you've done a lot of horror. Is this something where you just wanted to expand your horizons, or was this something that just landed on your lap and you were like, you know what, this is something I want to do really bad?
Well, I've always liked all kinds of movies, and once you're an independent filmmaker, anything that can help you raise money for the next project, it's sort of the way you go. So it's been a helpful niche to me to say I've been in horror all these years, and I've done this and this and this. but it hasn't helped enough that I've gotten $1 million budget. So it's not that big of a foot in the door. But I've liked all sorts of B movies, sci-fi movies, action films, horror films. I've always had it in me. There's another film that's out right now in the film festival circuit called Showdown in Yesteryear, which I only wrote, and some other guys produced and directed. It's a Western, sort of a fantasy Western with, mainstream humor and a romance and almost Back to the Future 3 type of sensibility. That was something that I did really just to do something different, and because I've always wanted to do a Western. Even my horror films, each one is different than the ones before it. Yeah. There's a similar feel to all of them, and some would say an awkwardness to all of them that's sort of a consistent style. But subject matter wise and themes, I try to do something different each time.
Sure. Well, you don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's like a band. You always want to expand your horizons. You don't want to make the same record over and over again.
Right. When I wrote the script for Guns of Eden, it was in 1996. I'd done 3 movies at that point, so I was doing something a little different. But I worked in movie theaters and video stores, and like I said, I like action films just as much as horror films. It's just, to me, they're all linked together.
Sure.
And, if you watch a lot of them, I'm sure you feel the same way. Some people might only like sci-fi and only like horror, and I get that. But I think to most of us, they're all related to each other somewhat. And coming out of movie theaters and video stores, I certainly felt that way. And I was a big fan of an author named, still am, David Morrell, who wrote the novel First Blood. He's written a lot of action books, a lot of espionage thrillers, and I was reading a lot of his stuff. And at that time, I think Blue Steel with Jamie Lee Curtis had just come out. And, we'd had Ripley and Aliens, of course. But really, in terms of thrillers, unless you're really looking at exploitation films, there weren't a lot of female-led stories. So if I had done this in 96, it would have been kind of radical. Now it's sort of a subgenre all of its own. Mm-hmm. Maybe the time was right for it.
And it's funny how that works out sometimes. Sometimes, when you sit on something for a little bit, it actually turns out to be better than what you thought it could have been if you would have released it at the time it was. Maybe it wouldn't have found the audience that it's found if you had done it back in 96.
No, it's true. And I used to write a lot. I mean, if it takes you 2 years to make a movie and you are a writer, you will continue writing. So I have a lot of scripts I haven't done. And one of them was the exact opposite. I had a thing which was sort of a cross between the first Phantasm and what the Harry Potter things became. Oh. And I wrote the first 2 scripts of a trilogy, and the Harry Potter books came out, and I was just like dead. A lot of people maybe would have said, ride it, exploit it in some way, but I was just like, I can't. So many things that are here are similar, but don't go as far out as they went in those books. They're not as well developed. I just can't go in. I can't finish this knowing it will never be close to as good as what Rowling did in those novels.
Well, after hearing that, I just need to go on record as saying I need to see the tall man playing Quidditch. I have to see it before I die. It's something that has to happen in my life. But while we're also talking about things that are important and cool in our own lives, the William Garrity Award, you won that at a film festival. Mm-hmm. That's very, very cool, man. What was it like to be the winner of that award?
It was nice. Not all my films went on the film festival circuit. And when they did, usually an actor would be recognized, Craig Sheffer, Debbie Rochon, or a song. We've won our share of awards, but rarely do I get something myself, which is fine. I mean, a number of my films have won Best of the Fest feature, which is a large part because of my work. Right. But this particular award, the William Garrity Award, is named after a man who he finished his career as a producer, but for many years he was a production manager and an assistant director. And he's sort of famous for having been the AD who controlled the car chase in The French Connection. And that's something that everyone looks at as, that's really impressive AD work, because you have to control everything that happens along the way. And I have worked as an AD for other people and as a production manager and as a script supervisor. I've tried my hands at a lot of different things, usually because there was an opening and a friend needed me on set. So this is what they gave me. But that was an award that was sort of an acknowledgement of everything I had done up to that point without quite being he's an over the hill lifetime achievement award type of thing.
Right. Well, it's any type of award, like you said, when you are the film director, obviously it's just like a football team. Without the team, it doesn't work. But if you try to put your quarterback at wide receiver, it's also not going to work. You have to know when you're the head coach, you have to know how to put your certain players where their strengths are. So a lot of times it's the actors, the composers, and the stuff that get the credit. But when you do get an award like this, it has to be that rewarding. Yes, we are doing something right here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not shocking you when I say that as a low-budget independent filmmaker, the rewards are few and far between. A friend of mine used to run a website, and he said, this was a few years ago, and he wrote, "Oh, I'm sure Greg has like 600 fans around the world, and that's really cool." And, there's some truth to that. There's that niche audience, the people that look forward to the films, or some people who maybe don't look forward to them and don't know who I am, but will try anything. But when some sort of recognition comes along, it's okay to take it and hug it and feel good about it and pat yourself on the back, because otherwise you may just give up. It's a hard business.
It is nice to get that acknowledgement sometimes. It's not something we always need, but it is something that is nice to hear every now and then. Hey, you did something right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that particular festival, the Sean O'Shea Film Festival, is run by filmmakers, so they understand.
Right. And that's
as I run a film festival myself also. And so a lot of the filmmakers who come enjoy my Q&As because I get to things that other questioners maybe don't. So it can work sometimes when the festival runners are filmmakers as well. Sometimes you feel like they're just doing it, as a promotional thing for their own films. But you can tell which ones really care and which ones don't. And the ones who really care are the ones who recognize me.
Well, when it's your peers that are giving you this award, that means even more, because like you said, they're in the business, they know what they're doing, they are going through the exact same struggles as you are. So when you have someone that's doing the exact same thing as you, recognizing you for how great you did, it's awesome, man. It's incredible. And the best thing is
anytime a film wins an award, it's really more of a validation for all the people who worked on it and believed in it with you. And part of the job when you're making the film is to keep those people excited and enthusiastic about the project. And that continues for a long time afterwards. You want to keep them enthusiastic during the long post-production process. And then when you do those first screenings and everything leading up to the big release week when the thing finally comes out, you want to keep them pumped up. So that's really a large part of it, is that they feel like they have not wasted their time, spending so much time believing in you.
Well, and it's amazing because, like I said, it is like you're the head coach or the manager if you're more of a baseball person, because you have, like you just said, you worded it perfectly. You have to make sure that everybody's happy, because if you're a director and you're working with people that aren't happy, you're not going to get the best performance out of everybody. So there is that managing of trying to make sure everybody's happy, everybody's wanting to work. So that way your project is going through, and most people aren't going to come in and try to, sandbag you, because it makes them look bad. But at the same time, you got to make sure that, morale is high all the time too.
Yeah, because we're never working under the best circumstances,
Right.
Maybe the food's a little light that day. Maybe the weather's shitty and you have to shoot anyway when people wish you wouldn't have to. I mean, every day is problem solving, every single day. And I usually work with a lot of the same people. So we all know what to expect. But like in this case, I know you interviewed Alexandra. She's from New York City. I'm here in Buffalo. She was a new player. So when my wife and I cast her, in addition to making sure that she was talented and right for the part, we wanted to make sure that she understood what the conditions would be shooting in Buffalo in July, which can either be very hot or very cold. You just never know.
She did an amazing job. It was amazing to have her on, not just to learn about her and the things that she's done, but that what introduced me to you as well. And a way that you guys can stay connected as well is not only by watching the movie that's down in the description, but also by following Greg on all his social media accounts, which are also down in the description. So you don't have to go far to look for those. So we know that Guns of Eden is going on right now. And I know that NDAs are definitely a thing and they can be a pain in the ass, but do you have anything coming up in the pipeline that you can tell us about that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I'm always busy. a film that a film that I was an associate producer on way back in 2014 is finally finished. It's a horror film called Lake Effect, directed by my friend Sam Qualiano, who's a little bit of a protege in that he's younger than me and I taught him how to make features, but he had already made 100 shorts on his own and had his own style. So I don't play that protege card too much, but
Sure.
he did Snow Shark, Ancient Snow Beast, and The Legend of Six Fingers, 2 films that I produced. And this was one that is about a monster that hits during a snowstorm. And unlike Snow Shark, where miraculously we had fresh snow every weekend that we shot, on this one, no snow.
Right.
No snow. So, I mean, a year later, he's shooting some more scenes and still not much snow. And the running time's kind of short. And the next winter, we were both working on a film, probably for Fred Olin Ray and his son, Chris Ray. And it just went on and on and on. And finally, that's done. So we're about to premiere that. So that's the next thing. We'll see when the release date is, but we're going to do our premiere in January. I'm trying to raise money for a werewolf script that I was trying to do before Richard Chismar sent me the book for Widow's Point and said, what do you think? Then that took precedence. Then the pandemic hit. I was going to do it again. And it's a cabin in the woods movie. So right. 7 actors and a crew and a practical effects crew in one cabin was just not happening.
Not plausible at all.
Which is why I turned to Guns of Eden, because I knew that 90% of it was outdoors and we could shoot it safely. So I'm trying to get that done. And some friends of mine are about to do a comedy and they've asked me to come on as a producer. So I'm probably going to do that as sort of a winter project. So
that's
a little
awesome,
bit of everything.
The busiest man in horror, man. They said it best themselves over at Fangoria. So we know that you got a couple things coming up in the future. And if there's ever any crowdfunding you're doing, guys, like I said, the social media links are down here so you can be a part of that, not only to help an independent film get made, but also there's sometimes some really cool perks that come along with that. So make sure you're checking back on that. But now here for a little bit, Greg, I would like to go back to the past and talk about how horror started for you. To be the busiest man in horror, you had to figure out horror at a young age. So, Greg, the first horror movie that you ever watched was?
So I have to cheat a little bit, just because the story here is that my mother raised me alone. She didn't drive. We used to walk to the movie theater. We'd buy comic books on the way home. And in those comic books were these little ads for the Aurora Monster model kits. And I would cut those out and put them on my TV. And back then, when you had a tube in the TV, paper would stick to the screen. And I would create my own little monster dramas, not knowing any of the stories of these things. Jump ahead 2 years to when I'm in the senior range of first grade, and I started buying those monster models. And my mother probably had like a show that she watched at 11 o'clock, because what was happening is typically she would wake me up half an hour into these movies. I didn't know they were on. She would wake me up and surprise me, say, come watch this. So I would like come into King Kong in the middle. Point being that in first grade, like in a short period of time, I saw a lot of these things late at night on school nights. So I can't really be certain what the first one is I saw. It's either The Horror of Dracula, which is what I'm choosing, or it's The Evil of Frankenstein, or it's The Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's one of those 3, but I believe it's The Horror of Dracula.
And what I mean, even those 3 movies, without those 3 movies, you know, and I'm talking about like the Universal monsters in general, you wouldn't have the horror that you have today. I firmly believe that, you know, our creatures, our Invisible Man, Dracula, Wolfman, those all influenced what we have today in one way or another. So we know you were a young man when you watched this movie for the first time with your mom, which also shout out to moms that let their kids watch horror, because that's like, I was blessed, Greg. I grew up in a video store. My mom and dad owned a little mom and pop. So I got to, you know, pick out movies whenever I wanted and Nintendo cartridges and all that. So I was, you know, I was really, really lucky. But, you know, moms that knew, as long as you educate your kids properly, showing them horror movies is not the end of the world, man. So shout out to all you moms and dads out there that do that. But The Horror of Dracula, obviously, I don't think you can really point to a more iconic movie in the horror genre that has shaped what horror is today. So do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most?
So I was excited by the whole thing, and the Hammer atmosphere in that film was different than what I expected. Even though I hadn't seen any movies before, I had my uncle who recently passed away, he was in film distribution for years. He sent me a lot of monster movie books. So I was familiar with the history, and I knew Bela Lugosi was Dracula before Christopher Lee, and I knew all this stuff. I wasn't quite ready for the atmosphere, the sexuality, and the discomfort that is in that particular film. But the thing that really stood out to me, I don't know if I'd read a photo novel. Famous Monsters, a magazine used to do that, the photo novel type things where they would show the movie in still frames. But I understood that Jonathan Harker was the hero, and he gets killed fairly early in this film. He's left in the castle, and in most versions, he makes it out of the castle and rejoins the other group later on. And in this one, Peter Cushing as Van Helsing then arrives at Castle Dracula, and he opens up a coffin, and there's Jonathan Harker with the fangs, and he's the first person who gets staked. So I think that had an effect on me for sure.
And especially when it's your first time seeing something like that. And what I like about what you just brought up is when you're talking about the Hammer horror films like this, there's definitely more of a gothic aesthetic to these ones than your Universal versions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's always that weird thing of Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, it's just like Sex Pistols, Ramones, who started punk rock. Like, listen, they were both amazing. And if I'm going to watch Christopher Lee be Batman, or I'm going to watch Bela Lugosi, I'm going to be happy. But the difference between Universal and Hammer horror, two completely different things. And to be able to talk about a Hammer horror film finally is amazing for me, because I haven't got to talk about this movie yet. And while it is still Dracula, this really is your romantic, sexualized Dracula. The Dracula that we all know and love is, the romantic Dracula. And as a young boy, did that affect you a little bit too, having it be such a romantic sexual thing, or was it more the horror that really stood out to you?
I was so young that what I noticed was, wow, there's a lot of, big bosoms in this movie. It's obviously intentional. I got that. It was obviously there to please somebody. It was just distracting for me, all these women in all the Hammer films, especially the Dracula films, though.
Right. Well, and being such a big fan of horror and being as busy as you are in horror, do you think that this movie influenced the way that you do films today?
It actually did have an influence on me, and that's a short movie. It's 83 minutes. Now, I know the Universals were also short, but this was a different time where they were doing longer movies, and Dracula is a long novel. It's a long, complex novel with a lot of shifting different point of views and stuff. And they did a brilliant job, Jimmy Sankster, the screenwriter, condensing that novel and finding ways to get the point across in ways that were respectful of the first novel, similar enough. And when I was in high school, I taught myself screenwriting on a manual typewriter. And the way I did it was by adapting novels that I read into screenplay format.
Sure.
Usually they were novels that were sequels to novels which had been turned into movies. So I did The Vengeance Trail of Josie Wales. I did Logan's World. But the most ambitious one I did was Interview with a Vampire. And I took the same approach as Horror of Dracula, which was to condense it way down to like a 90-page script. And I thought I did a pretty good job. I like the longer version. I think the movie's great. But as an experiment, it's kind of what got me started.
It's awesome because, like I said, if you would have never watched this movie with your amazing mother, maybe you wouldn't be the person that you are today. And I think that especially people in the horror genre, that first one really molds and influences who we are, because we're always chasing that feeling again. And like you said, this is not a very long movie, but there's a lot of effective scenery. And we talked about which scene affected you the most. But what would you say is your favorite scene from the Horrors of Dracula?
The ending is so exciting. Peter Cushing has said in interviews that it was his idea to have Van Helsing jump on that long table and pull down the curtains that bring the sunlight in so he can force the cross. We hadn't seen the bit where somebody takes other inanimate objects and turns them into a cross somehow, and he forces Dracula into the sun. And even though they edited the American version, I know the British version has a little more detail there on the disintegration. It's just a great scene. It's very exciting. And he was, Peter Cushing was just this little guy who was just all out about adding some adventure to the proceedings, and he really succeeded.
It is amazing. Like I said, the difference is when you've watched the the Draculas of the Universal and the Hammer horror, the stories are also different. The endings are different. The meat is different. And we know that horror started for you with Dracula, the horrors of Dracula. But now I kind of want to throw a little bit of a curveball here at you for a second. My little buddy Ghostface is here, Greg, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Greg? We know your first was the horrors of Dracula, but what is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Depending on whether it's a Monday or a Tuesday, it's either Dawn of the Dead or the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I will say I saw both of them for the first time in a movie theater. In the case of Dawn of the Dead, I saw it first run. And in the case of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I never had an opportunity to see it. I was too young when it came out in theaters and there was no video yet. So right. When I first moved to New York City, I went to see it on a double feature with The Hills Have Eyes with Robert Sabin, the star of my movie Slime City. And it had me shaking. It really did. So I love both of those tremendously.
Yeah. And those are two movies that obviously have withstood the test of time. So I can't, disagree with you on that statement. Now, we talk often about remakes, requels, sequels being all the rage. Would you like to see the horrors of Dracula remade today?
Well, I mean, Dracula's been redone so many times. I think if the current owner of the corporate name Hammer Films wanted to do Dracula again and call it the Horror of Dracula, they could, but it's the Stoker source novel no matter what.
Right. And that's the tricky question with this one, because we've had so many different, reimaginings of Dracula that it's hard to say, I want to see another one today, because give me the old practical ones. I don't need a CGI'd out Dracula right now.
I would love to see Marvel do the Tomb of Dracula comic book. That would be awesome.
That would, yeah. See, I loved comic books growing up. Tim's Cards and Comics was right down the road from us, and horror graphic novels and horror comic books are amazing if you can get them in the right spot. Now, a big thing about today with remakes and requels as well, you're not going to get as much in the practical effect stuff as we were talking about a little bit ago. If you were given the chance to direct a Dracula movie today, would you do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm assuming that means to do a film with a real budget so that I could have production design and atmosphere and stuff like that, and that I wouldn't be shooting in, right now, my wall is red behind me because in 2014, we painted it that color for Killer Rack. This was the lead characters. My house is still this color. So assuming that we're not doing Dracula in my house and I'm going to have the budget to do a real thing, I would do it.
That's awesome, man. So before I let you go, I want to remind everybody, all of his links are down in the description. So make sure you're checking those out. Make sure you're watching Guns of Eden. Now, Greg, I have one last question for you, and I think I know the answer, but I got to ask. We're going to bounce back to the Horror of Dracula. And what we're going to do here is we're going to rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. What we're doing here is strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of the Horror of Dracula be?
I'm going for the full 5.
To still have a lasting effect this many years later, it's hard for a first horror movie not to give you that 5 skull ranking, because it may not be a perfect movie, and that's why we don't judge it as like we're on direction or score or anything like that. We're not being critics, because it's very hard to have a perfect movie, but you can have a movie that perfectly affects you. So I completely agree with you there. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time out to come out and hang out with me. If you guys haven't, it's the third time I'm telling you. The links are down in the description. So thank you again, Greg. Please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror. Stay what you are. And we'll see you guys soon.